So me and Waldek, we are back. We have this series of 3 different modules as we are going through the Viva Connections extensibility model. And in the Viva Connection, we have 3 different extensibility options. We're going to talk about them in soon. But today is not about adaptive cards, actually, because that was a week ago. That recording is available, and there will be an individual video on that one relatively soon in the YouTube channel as well. So today we're going to talk about the Viva Connection and the web parts, and how do you actually modify the Viva Connection desktop. But before we go there, let's talk about the situation as a whole for those who are not up to date what's happening here. So first of all, we're going to talk about the Viva Connection extensibility. So if you go AKMS M365 dev-learn, you can find the extend Microsoft Viva Connection, really good learning path. Waldek did an awesome job of creating this learning path, and it's 1.5 hours, and you understand basically what are the different options of doing extensibility in Viva Connection. And really good exercises, simple to do, simple to follow. And then you master Viva Connection extensibility right after that. Right, Waldek?
Exactly.
Yes, it's enough to put it in your CV. I know Viva Connection. Right. Now, but today we're going to talk about the Viva Connection and how do we extend the Viva Connection with web parts, and what does that mean? So we're going to do a live demo here. For those who are super familiar with SharePoint framework, this looks pretty much the same and interesting, so you might be familiar with this. SharePoint framework in general, and there is an ongoing discussion. We talked about this one in the past as well. There's an ongoing discussions of renaming SharePoint framework because it is much more than just SharePoint. And in certain, let's say, scenes and certain group of people, SharePoint has a relatively negative tone on its name. So we want to, there's a leadership level decision of starting to rename SharePoint framework to something else, because you can use it also for Microsoft Teams and for Viva Connection, and in future for other areas as well, so which we cannot talk about yet. But today we're going to talk about how do we build a custom web part and how do we extend Microsoft Viva Connection using that, so you will be familiar with that. Now, just to recap the situation, Viva Connection Toolkit is generally available. Viva Connection is generally available as well. I'm going to show in practice today what does it mean, how do you set it up in briefly, so you're up to date on how to move forward with this. But basically, as said, we're using SharePoint Framework 1.13 as the tooling and the toolkit to create Viva Connection extensibility. In this case, again, we're going to create a web part, which is for extending the desktop and the experiences. So that's not available in the mobile experiences. We're going to talk about those things in the upcoming slides as well. Just to recap again on the Viva Connection extensibility options, there are 3 different extensibility options which are going through within this learning path as well. So you can create web parts, and web parts are basically, they are configurable by the editors who are designing the Viva Connection desktop experience, so they can modify the properties and how the behavior is being done. There's the application customizers, which are being exposed in every single page in the Viva Connection. So you can use them to embed, for example, headers and footers in the page. And then there's the adaptive card extensions, which is mainly for the mobile experience, but they do have actually desktop experience as well. I'm going to see that in a bit as well. But it's basically the mobile Viva Connection mobile experience. That's when we use adaptive cards. And again, just to recap, today we're going to focus on web parts. Not adaptive card extensions, we focused on that one last week, and next week we're going to focus on application customizers, and then we're going to move to another learning path in a completely different topics. But we want to actually go through this awesome material for everybody to benefit as well. I can, by the way, see questions as they come on the chat, so I will try to follow up on them if there's any, and Waldek is going to jump on things as needed as well. Right, Waldek?
Definitely. Absolutely.
Yes, and
still here.
You're going to help me to do some coding today. So let's see how this
goes. Totally.
As a principal program manager, you're not expected to write any code anymore. So now, learning objective of today, we're going to talk about a bit on the development tooling, how to get started on that. You might be super familiar on that already. And we're going to talk about how do we extend Microsoft Viva Connection with web parts and deploy the test custom web parts in Microsoft Viva Connection. So how do we actually deploy those to be available, just to understand the basics, how this is actually being done. If you are coming from if you build stuff for modern SharePoint Online, you might be familiar with these things already, but again, it's the same familiar extensibility model, which is available for Viva Connection in certain level. And I need to point out that the guy in the second row is doubtful, so he's clearly not convinced. So I don't think we actually have the slide where he is convinced in the end, but let's see. Now, as we have then enabled the Viva Connection, and then we want to have the end users or the editors to be able to, for example, surface internal data from internal systems to the employees directly in the Viva Connection desktop, or we want to surface or aggregate information, or we want to, let's say, inform people using our custom logic. That's when we are going to build a reusable widget, which is going to show, in this case, a company announcements, which the content editors can, the web part is going to show company announcements, which the content editors and page editors can then put it on the page. In our case, we're going to put it on the Viva desktop welcome page, and we're going to talk about what is basically the experience there and how do you modify the Viva Connection experiences as well. Now, how do we get started? We're not going to do all of this. I'm going to walk this through as we're waiting for Juvonen generator to walk through. So I'm going to show you my setup so you're up to date on what's happening here. But basically what we need to do is enable the Viva Connection. There is a really good documentation how to do this, actually in the learning path as well. So the learning path actually goes through all of the needed steps. The only a bit challenge there, just a word of a warning, is that as you go through and enable the Viva Connection and a home site in your tenant, and then surfacing that eventually in Microsoft Teams through the Viva Connection, there are caching situations and there are some timelines. So there are server-side things which we need to get executed. So every now and then there might be a 30-minute delay for something to actually enable. And it's a bit frustrating, so to say, but it's a one-time configuration per tenant. So that's why it's not something what we, for now at least, have designed to be immediate, because again, making it immediate as a one-time configuration in a tenant wasn't a justified cost. So, and then we're going to install SharePoint Framework Juvonen generator. We're going to talk about that one in a bit as well. And then I'm going to show you the SharePoint list of sample data, which we already have available for testing. So we're not going to spend too much time on there. And then today's point was about extending connection, Viva Connection with the web parts. And that's when we basically design, the web parts are the components of web widgets in this page and then welcome page in a desktop, which are exposing information. And the key point here is that you have full flexibility on designing whatever kind of experience you want. So you can add any web parts, you can add additional web parts, and it's all flexible for you to design. We as a Microsoft, we don't lock down this experience. So if you're a partner, you can basically design different set of offerings on top of the Viva Connection with different set of web parts and experiences. And that's one way of approaching how do we do these things, which is really, really cool. Web parts can have content editors. You can configure that. You can modify that. You can modify the web part properties. And on the right side, web part always have customizable properties. Well, not necessarily that, but they can have customizable properties. In our case, for example, today we're gonna lock down the information. You own the HTML and CSS of the web part, this web widget, so you can do whatever you want inside of that Chrome, inside of the HTML structure. And
including using adaptive cards to render UI.
Including using adaptive cards. You can actually do that as well. That is true. Yes. And of course, it's a good idea to build a responsive UI in mind just to avoid any surprises over there. And also the web parts, including in the Viva Connection or in a SharePoint Online, they can be connected between each other. So you can build this connected experiences, which is really, really cool as well. Now, as a rule of thumb, we recommend on building web parts if you need an extended Viva Connection desktop experience and you want to let content editors decide what do you want to put on a page. So you basically have this then configurable option to add on a page or remove from a page and all of that. So that's kind of the rule of a thumb for when the web part is the right option. And let's actually jump into the writing of the code. So first of all, I'm going to actually create the solution, and we're going to use SharePoint Framework 1.13. It's already installed, so I can. So now, if I do npm, if I can write, there we go. Having a keyboard without. No, that's not correct.
npm ls.
Oh,
or
yes,
list.
I'm missing the list. Yeah. 1 second. Where's my mouse?
Just helping.
Okay, here we go. not there. That's a good point. So there we go. So we're listing basically what has been installed in my computer. Currently, I'm just going to pinpoint the right solution which have been installed whenever the npm is. Oh, I have a typo.
Yeah,
there.
you need single equals.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. That's why you are helping me on making this happen.
Yes.
So basically, in here, we have the Microsoft Generator SharePoint installed as a 1.13 version. That's what we need to install from npm. And if you're not familiar with all of this stuff, sounds weird maybe, but it's basically how web stack development works. You write in TypeScript, you install stuff from npm or Yarn, and typical web development, no SharePoint isms or Viva connection isms needed, so to say. And what we're going to do here is that we're going to run the Microsoft SharePoint geometry generator. And I'm going to follow up on the guidance what we have, which we provided in as a documentation. And I'm going to copy just the information. It's not really writing code as I'm copying the information directly from the exercise, but still. We're going to target SharePoint Online. By the way, this question is going to go away in 1.14 as it actually is being mentioned there. We're going to use the current folder. And we're going to say no for these particular questions, following up on the guidance. And we're going to create a web part in this case. We're going to call it a company announcement. And as it shows company announcements, so the descriptions are visible as the end user is selecting the web part, and it is using no JavaScript framework. And that starts now the solution creation. As we're doing that, let me show you what we have available in our test environment. So first of all, we already have our homepage or a home site set up in the tenant. It could be the root of the tenant, or it could be any URL in the tenant. So in this case, we just created a home site collection and set that to be the home site. Then after that, what we've done is that we enable the global navigation that gives you some additional functionalities, for example, in here. After that, what we've done is that we actually installed the Viva Connection application. And the cool thing about the Viva Connection application is that you can personalize that. Like in our case, even though we install Viva Connection application to be available in a tenant, we can change the name to be the company name. So Contoso is the imaginary name of this company where we are working right now. Waldek is the CTO, Chief Technical Officer of Contoso. Now, and then we enabled that solution to be available based on the company policy settings. And this is basically making sure that whenever somebody accesses Microsoft Teams, they have a certain set of solutions available in the Teams left navigation. It is a really nice way of defining a consistent experience across the company. You can, by the way, create multiple policies. So you can have multiple, you can have a default organization-wide, and then you can have another one for engineers, and another one for consulting, another one for sales, and all of that stuff, which is really, really cool as well. Now, as we have then done that one, that means that if I go to Microsoft Teams, and I'm going to use the web client in this case, just a easier way to differentiate the profile from my personal profile, we can see that the Contoso application is available in here, and this is the Viva connection. So we basically are surfacing our home site in here, and if I click, for example, in here, we can see the latest news and all of that information, global navigation available directly within the Microsoft Teams. So we are in the context of the work. We don't have to move anywhere else from here, and that's really the objective, what we want to do with Viva Connection as well. By the way, just a note, if you're looking into doing a cool demos, you can really easily use the lookbook.microsoft.com, which we didn't use in this case. And for example, use the perspective or one of these designs and then enable the Viva connection in them. So that way you get a really nice experience and a cool looking site and example content and all of that available for demo purposes. Good. I got a thumbs up from Waldek. That's always a good sign. So let me now go to the actual code. So the scaffolding has ended. We created a SharePoint framework solution. I'm going to a bit increase the font and sizing here so you can see what I'm doing. It is a SharePoint framework solution. We're not going to deep dive exactly what does that mean. If you're familiar with that, then it's OK. And we're going to actually go to the solution code. Now I need to go and double check that I'm doing this properly from the code. And first of all, what we want to do and what is our objective is that we want to actually create a web part which is surfacing these announcements which the end users can actually create in the root side. So it's a simple scenario in this case. So a content editor can create announcements, which can be also important, and we're going to render those as part of this web part. So relatively simple thing, but it really shows the power of using, again, TypeScript and the flexibility what we have using the web stack tooling as well. So let's go back in here. We have a baseline structure available. What I'm going to do here is that I'm going to add an SP HTTP reference. So this is an easiest package and library to use to access information in SharePoint. It's going to do all of the access token handling. That classic challenge that where do I get the token? You just hit the API with the token. Where do I get the token? Well, luckily this fellow is taking care of all of that for you. So it's a really seamless single sign-on accessing to APIs. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to update the render method. So in this case, there's the render method. I'm going to get rid of the example default, and I'm going to update that a bit. I'm going to indent that a bit because otherwise that's getting annoying. I can't help it. If the indentation is not correct, it hurts eyes. So actually close that. So having a look on here, what we're doing quickly, we're hitting a API, SharePoint, in this case, SharePoint REST API. Of course, you can absolutely and should be using Microsoft Graph APIs as well for getting some of the information. It really depends, again, what kind of information you're surfacing. Graph is absolutely brilliant. In this case, we're just using the simple REST APIs from SharePoint. From the announcement list, we are getting title, description, and important. That's our objective. And then there are the display results selection. That's what's happening here. So I'm going to actually then take the display results. I'm going to paste in the needed code in there and the intention, well, it's there. But basically what's happening here is that we are getting those individual announcements and we're rendering them in the right format, depending on is the important set or not. So there's going to be a bit different rendering on the styles perspective if the announcement is important or not. And I'm going to save the changes. That's the one thing what I always keep on forgetting. Control S, Control S, Control S. So you compile the code and then you don't change the changes and you're wondering what is wrong, and then you've got about saving. Now, let's then, actually, good point, by the way, Waldek, you are saving, you're even saying in the guidance that remember to save. So that's really good reminder.
Exactly.
Documentation. So
read the manual. Good. Just read the manual.
That's true. Now, the one thing what we also want to do here is that we're using styles. Like here we can see styles.important, styles.company announcement, styles.container. So we need to make sure that for our web part and the experience, we have the right style. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to replace the existing style file, which is based on the default structure, with this structure from the code, which is then having the needed definitions like the important and DD and DD. So we're rendering the information in the right way as an output. So relatively simple stuff, again, defining the fonts and all of that stuff in here, and that's ready to go. Now, I'm going to go then back. And first of all, Control S, we are saved. We can see that there's no pending changes. I'm going to go back in the command line. I'm going to do gulp serve no browser. And this basically means that I'm running the local host web service, and I want to test out this web part in my tenant. So we want to check it out that is it actually working? Is the code working? We would be able to do debugging as well, optionally, and we're going to skip that today from a timing perspective. But this is really to make sure that we are serving the code still from localhost and double checking that everything is working fine. So let me go in here. Let me go to the home of the site. And we kind of use the online workbench. Online workbench, if you're familiar with this, there's nothing new in here, but you basically go to a _layouts 15 workbench.aspx, a bit of a complex thing. If you're not familiar with this stuff, how would I know that it's there? And maybe we should have a easier way to get there from a developer perspective. But again, future improvements. In here, as I'm running the local workbench, SharePoint Online is smart enough to understand, hey, you actually have things available from your local workbench, and we can see the important announcement web part to be available, and it shows important announcement.
This is the ace, actually. You want to move down. It is
actually that you're 100% correct.
Local one.
You are 100% correct. That's the ace.
Up, it was right there up. Right there. If you go all the way up. If you go all the way up, second row, all the way up.
Yeah, here we go, because we didn't compile that. You're 100% correct. Now, the reason why this is a bit confusing is that I'm using the same tenant which we tried, the ACE and adaptive card last week. So that's that one. This is not the web part which we just created. We created a web part, and we created a web part which is running from local, which is actually pretty nice that it's actually telling me that it's running from local host. It's not running in the tenant. And I can select the company announcement. And then there's our company announcement. Woohoo! It's actually working. So this means that we basically copied the code. I was able to copy the code which Waldek provided for me in a correct way. Woohoo! I can actually do that.
It's working.
It's working. And that information which we're basically saying here, just to recap that one, is coming from the announcement list that was in the code as well. So we were accessing the announcement list, basically showing complete mandatory training, and that's important, and holiday season company announcement. And then that was the text. If I go back in here, we can see that the information is matching or from that list. That's really cool. That was super easy. That wasn't hard at all. At least when you're following up on the tutorial, right? So
read the manual. Read the manual.
And then you learn. That's always the thing. You learn by doing. That's always true. So for sure. So I'm going to close up the debugger. So just closing on that one. And then as we already confirmed that our absolutely awesome functionality is functioning, we can already package this and get it up and running in the Viva connection. So let's go call bundle -ship. So that's going to prepare our JavaScript files, TypeScript files, compile to be JavaScript, and prepare them to get packaged to get deployed. By the way, there's good comments on the chat related from Carl. Serve the JSON in a config folder. There's multiple options as how to do these things. We've got kind of taking the simple route right now, showing this in a partly manual way as well. There are more, let's say, sophisticated ways of doing things as well. Thank you, Carl, on pointing out that one. And then what I'm going to do is then I'm going to do call package package solution and -ship as well. And this is going to basically create me the solution file. And this is where SharePoint Framework really shines. We're not going to deploy and Viva Connection extensibility really shines. We're not going to require to be deployed our assets to a website or web application in Azure or AWS or somewhere else. We actually host all of this stuff automatically for you. No costs, no nothing. It's just magically hosted, and it works without any additional cost or complexity and operational or maintenance problems with that. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to actually open up my file system. We created the package. It's pretty small from font perspective, but let me actually extend that one. There is our SPFx file, which is actually a zip file. But it's more fancy to say that it's an SPFx file than a zip file. And it actually contains all of the assets, so JavaScript files, images, all of that's inside of it. So now I can send this to with email, or I can sell it for somebody for gajillion or millions, and then I will retire for the rest of my career. Well, not necessarily. That's a relatively simple web part, but it's a contained solution. And now I can install this to be available in my tenant. So let's actually do that. So let me go to the app catalog, which, by the way, looks insanely ugly. SharePoint app catalogs is one of those things which are being worked on to have a modernized look and feel. It's pretty outdated, but it's an administrative experience, so it's not a massive deal as such. And I'm going to drag and drop that solution to be available. So, and there we go. And it's going to ask me that, do you trust the solution? Because it's running in the browser with the permissions of the user. I'm going to install that to be available in a tenant. And there we go. it is now deployed. It's not tenant deployed. No errors. We're looking good. So we can actually start using this in that particular site. That's pretty cool. So we are now ready to go. As we install this in, it actually extracted the package. It's put it automatically to be hosted in a tenant. And now we can actually start using that. Again, without the local host servers or without the local host being running. So now there's no more longer dependencies on the developer box at this point. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the home site because I want to have this web part and experience only available within this site, not in other sites. And I'm going to install that to be available as an app. From my organization and apps which I can add, it says SPFx company announcement web part. I'm going to add that one to be available in the site. And that's going to then install that solution to be available from the tenant app catalog to this particular site. And it says that it's been added successfully. We can double check that from a content page, site content page. We can see the solution to be available. And that then means that if you go to the home page, we can start modifying and using that absolutely brilliant $1 million web part. By the way, if somebody wants to buy this for $1 million, we're willing to sell. It's Waldek. Waldek has the rights on that. So I'm going to add the web part in. And if I scroll down now, it's not in the local anymore. It's actually in a bit different experience. It's in the advanced. We didn't set the icon for it. We didn't modify any of the other settings, but we can see the company announcement. If I put it in here, there's our company announcement. Awesome, brilliant looking web part. And I'm going to publish this in the SharePoint Online. And here where it actually gets interesting with the Viva connection. So now if I go here, if I refresh the experience in the Microsoft Teams, where we have the Viva Connection application running, we can actually see that it is, of course, reflecting all of the changes in here as well. So we can see the web part available here. And that's how we create web parts. That was relatively simple, right? Viva!
Yes, as long as you follow the manual. It is simple.
As long as you follow the manual, yes. To be fair, I think I failed even on following up on some of that stuff. So from a timing perspective, I'm going to take 1 more minute and then Brian can take us home. But basically, you might be familiar with Viva Connection and how do we extend the Viva Connection desktop with the SharePoint framework. And we are heading to a direction where, again, SharePoint framework is going to be renamed. We talk about Viva Connection and Viva more from a branding perspective, but underlying technology is still TypeScript, web stack development, all of that stuff. And the web part is one way of extending Viva Connection on top of the adaptive card and application customizers. So we're going to do the application customizers then next week. And I think that's pretty much it for us today.